Welcome to our first Sounds Reasonable episode in 8 years. I'm your host, Dr. Brad, and I am joined in the production of our weekly show by Tim and Tracy. We are all members of the Free Thought community, and our Sounds Reasonable website can be found on Facebook. Do you experience frequent irrational thoughts, a pervasive belief in a divine sky daddy, an insatiable urge to read horoscopes, perform spells, speak in tongues, or pray? Fortunately, you are now listening to the cure for these ailments, Sounds Reasonable. This show is dedicated to bringing you, the listener, the latest news in free thought, science, logic and reason, and politics and religion. And of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts with us after each episode by posting comments and asking questions on our Facebook page. I hope we will eventually open our show with John Lennon's Imagine, because this song is considered to be the anthem of free thinkers everywhere. Just like John Lennon says in the song, we hope someday you will join us so the world can be as one. What is free thought? What does it mean to be a free thinker? The dictionary definition is a person who forms opinions about religion on the basis of reason, independent of tradition, authority, or established belief. Here's Christopher Hitchens' working definition. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors, but we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake. We'll now move on to our science news segment. And remember that the scientific mind is one that allows its perceptions of reality to be constrained by good evidence and good argument. Now, being a virologist, I can't help but be rather fascinated and horrified, for that matter, by what is going on with the coronavirus pandemic. But before we get to a story related to that, I want to make sure that our listeners know what is meant by the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I'm going to quickly put up a diagram that illustrates this. I hope quickly. Do you guys see that?
For some reason, I'm not seeing it. Yep. There we go.
Is that on the screen now?
I'm seeing your documents.
Yes. Can you see the figure?
No, I'm just seeing a list of your documents.
Well, shoot, how do I get that up there? Well, all right, we'll skip the figure. And I'll figure that out in a later show, how to do that. Now, a good place to look up what the Dunning-Kruger effect is the catalogofbias.org. That's all one word, catalog of bias, and then .org. This site is a treasure trove of common biases, but the one I want to focus on for the moment is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, unfortunately, we are probably all guilty of exhibiting this at one time or another. And what it means is that those that come to know just a little bit about a particular topic suddenly think they become experts. Then, as they learn more about the topic, their confidence starts to plunge. And then after they truly become experts, so after actually doing the work, doing their due diligence, they justifiably get their confidence restored. So Tracy and Tim, I don't know about you, but I have never experienced the decay effect to the extent I have in the face of this pandemic. There are more armchair physicians out there than ever before, not to mention epidemiologists, vaccine experts, et cetera. So tell me your experiences on this.
I don't know, but if I have plumbing problems, I like to watch a YouTube video and become an expert. So I'm basically a plumber. So as far as that goes,
And the social media
household chores.
served as a platform for every Tom, Dick, and Harry who thinks they know or have heard or talked or have a relative that has all these other experiences with that. And again, it doesn't help when you have certain political leaders that listen to some wacko and then gets on his news his press briefing and talks about maybe we should inject or disinfectants. So that doesn't help things.
Yeah, it definitely does not help, obviously. but you know, kind of going back to Tracy's point, however, and not to berate your position, Tracy, but if I have a plumbing problem, I'm going to call a plumber. Just like if I have toothache, I'm going to call the dentist. I don't believe in the doorknob and string theory.
Yeah.
Kids do, though.
Yeah. So anyway, it's been amazing how much the public thinks it knows about these issues, and of course, as regular Facebook viewers, all three of us, we can all point to examples of this on a daily basis, I imagine. But like I said, I've certainly been guilty of it in other areas where, you know, I have probably no business telling somebody that I know something that I've heard a little bit about, and suddenly I'm an expert. So I know we're all guilty of it. But to our listeners out there, let's try really hard to not be from this point on. Okay, anything else? Any other points you want to bring up about the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Again, I think just like you said, looking at what are your sources and making sure that if it's something that has to do with a specific topic, that you are getting information from knowledgeable sources. You know, if it's a coronavirus, you're looking at information that's coming from the healthcare, from scientists, CDC, WHO, healthcare officials, and not someone sitting at home in his shorts on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. Or or getting pharmacy advice, what have you. So yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Okay, so on with science news. So the story I'm going to relay was published in the New York Times on May 28th of this year. And it's entitled, "The World is Still Far from Herd Immunity for Coronavirus." So I'm going to try to bring, I had this thing up a minute ago, and I'm probably not going to be able to get this to come up for me either. Get to my desktop. There it is. Yeah. Well, where'd it go? Now I got my Dunning-Kruger effect there, but I can't find the other thing. Oh, crap, I'm not having any luck at all today.
Put a tab on the web browser.
Yeah, so
You just open up, if you see any of your web browser on desktop, then click on that and open, or share that.
now I want to, I have a figure that I wanted to show here. And I had this figured out earlier, I thought. Why won't, I can't get rid of that. I want to get a figure that I just brought up. That I can put away. Oh, I know what I had to do. That's right. That's what I had to do. I got to drag this into here. That's not going to let me do it now, is it? Well, all right. My bad. We'll get all of that figured out by the next time so I don't screw around here. But anyway, so the coronavirus still has a long way to go. And that's really the message that needs to get out there from a crop of new studies across the world that are trying to quantify how many people may have been infected. Now, the official case counts often substantially underestimate the number of coronavirus infections, and that's something that I want to make sure people are aware of. Okay, so you see a particular percentage or number of individuals that are infected. Well, that's going to be an underestimate, and the reason for that is we just don't have adequate testing. Now, if we did, we'd have a much better handle on exactly how many people have been infected. But in new studies that test the population more broadly, the percentage of people who have been infected so far is still in the single digits. The numbers are a fraction of the threshold known as herd immunity, at which the virus can no longer spread widely. And that's what the figure that I was trying to bring up was going to show, was that you're unable to effectively spread a disease when you reach a certain level of immunity within a given population. Now, just to put this in perspective, it's thought that for coronavirus, we're going to need about 65% immunity in the population to prevent spread. That's based on the current understanding of how infectious this particular agent is. To contrast that with measles virus, you need 95%. So measles is about the most infectious agent known out there. And that's why we see those outbreaks of measles when we get a lax in vaccination. Doesn't take long to drop below the threshold of herd immunity. Now, the basic go ahead, Tracy.
Oh no, I was just
okay.
nodding.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so the basic concept of that is if you have a certain percentage of the population immunized, that will protect the individuals that aren't. And the reason is a rather simple one. You cut off the chain of spread. Okay, so having a certain percentage of the population for a given disease immunized simply prevents the spread to those that aren't. Okay, so that's the concept behind herd immunity. Now, just to give some examples here, so New York City currently has 19.9%. So at least about 45% below where we need to be for herd immunity. London, 17.5, Madrid, 11.3, Wuhan, China, 10%, Boston, 10%, Stockholm, 7.3, and Barcelona, 7.1. So even in some of the hardest hit cities in the world, the studies suggest the vast majority of people still remain vulnerable to the virus. Now, some countries, notably Sweden and briefly Britain, have experimented with limited lockdowns in an effort to build up immunity in their populations. But even in these places, recent studies indicate that no more than 7 to 17% of people have been infected so far. In New York City, which has had the largest coronavirus outbreak in the US, again, around 20% of the city's residents have been infected by the virus as of early May. Now, of course, the problem with the problem with expecting natural infection to take care of this situation is that you're going to have to resign yourself to accepting the death toll that goes along with that. Now there are a number of people out there that say, hey, let's do that. You know, why not? Let's just go for it. We'll just accept the percentage that are going to die from the disease, but it'll be worth it for economic reasons. And I've always wondered with individuals that say that, just how much they consider one life worth. So how many have to die to equal $1 million, for example, or 10 million, et cetera. So I find that as a humanist, very unacceptable approach. And in fact, it's the approach of the smallpox outbreaks in the 1700s. Let's go around and infect people, although at least they had some basis for infecting people that with pustules that had already formed in individuals that had the disease, because the virus did appear to be attenuated to some extent. But as I recall, it was still about 30 to 40% of individuals that were variolated. That's what they called the process. Were variolated and still acquired the disease. So with smallpox, it was not a good idea, and I don't see too much difference here with coronavirus. So with that, I'll go ahead and take your guys' comments here. So what do you think?
Well, you mentioned about the last thing you're talking about as far as letting everybody get it and recover, or not recover, I guess. You saw that proposed quite a bit, I think, on posts and things like that. But they just don't understand, like you mentioned, the fact that you're going to have to then resign yourself to the fact that you're going to have a lot of people dying. And kind of what I feel is those people that propose that, yeah, it's all right as long as it isn't somebody that's one of their family members, or their grandpa, or their mom, or their dad. Then this should be on the other foot there, probably. But yeah, as you mentioned, really the only true way to get a herd immunity is to develop the vaccine and have that given to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how else are you going to do it? Again, it's completely unreliable to just try to have, shall we say, coronavirus parties. That's what they used to do for chickenpox and for rubella or the German measles.
Right.
Particularly with females, of course, because of the risk of birth defect from having German measles during the first trimester of pregnancy. So yeah, that was a common practice, but obviously one that is not desirable.
Right. And again, the concern with this virus, having all those asymptomatic carriers or potential for asymptomatic carriers, and then, like you said, to really get a handle on it, you have to test everyone. And it seems like our government, or we're not willing to do that, to test everyone, only those that may appear to have symptoms.
Well, and the antibody test at the moment is not extremely effective. So we are still working in the dark, even with the antibody tests that are currently available. 50% success rate isn't going to cut it. So they've got to work towards getting that particular test improved. Plus, they're going to need to evaluate vaccination. I mean, you in order to evaluate the vaccine, you've got to be able to test for antibodies. And if they can't do that, then I'm not sure how they're going to evaluate it, other than, I suppose, epidemiological means. You could say, well, we vaccinated X amount of people and we've noticed this amount of decline in coronavirus infections. So I suppose you could track it that way to some extent, but that's still not what's needed. We've got to have that test. And it's been rather surprising to me that some of the leading labs in the U.S. have not been able to get that test and nailed down. So I don't know exactly what the major holdup is.
Did I read that right, that they were thinking that some of those that had gotten it and recovered and then got it a second time, were they speculating that maybe their immune response was not as good, or do you think that was a little different, one of the other different strains that was popping up?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a different strain. What I think most likely happened there is that they never actually cleared the virus.
Okay.
They maintained the virus after recovery, which isn't uncommon, of course. You can have virus continuing to replicate in the presence of antibodies. So that's not surprising that would happen. But of course, you have to keep that in mind, that just because someone has received the vaccine or been infected and recovered, that they're no longer infectious. That's not going to be the case. So that just makes the need for vaccination even more desirable.
And then was there something, or did I see a little blurb, or have they looked into how effective the interferons release are at producing the antiviral proteins and non-susceptible, or in surrounding cells or in area cells?
Right. So that's one of the more insidious components of how this virus works, is that it turns off what's called innate immunity. Yeah. And innate immunity is a major component of that for viruses is interferon. So for our listeners, if you're not real familiar with interferon, it does what its name implies. It interferes with the ability of viruses to replicate. And this particular virus delays that response. Okay, so there's one of its proteins is accomplishing this. I don't know if they have nailed that down, which one is doing it, but there are other viruses that are able to do this as well, that can delay the interferon response and make you susceptible for a longer period of time. And so, and I did see somebody, I did catch an article on this that they were thinking about trying to use interferon sprays, nasal sprays. But of course, the problem is you would have to do it within 12 hours, 12 to 24 hours of getting infected. Well, most people don't even know they are infected at that point. So I don't think everybody can run around taking an interferon nasal spray. So from a practical standpoint, it's just not going to work. From a theoretical point, yeah, it should, but from a practical standpoint, you just can't do it. Okay, I think we're going to need to move on, so we'll be right back after this short break with more Sounds Reasonable.
Holy crime, but how can I hide you without an alibi? It's a lover's fight without an alibi. You took my innocence. I can't wait no longer. I'm playing with the monsters. Everything that brought me alive. Playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a lover's fight without an alibi. You took my innocence without an alibi.
And we're back. A little alibi, which I thought might be a good lead in to a political story. So a key component in the despot's playbook is to know how to disperse demonstrations against him or her. Trump is quickly becoming a master at it. So Tim has the story on the recent events that took place in Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. So Tim, what do you have for us?
Well, I have an article from Huffington Post, their online article from June 2nd. And it talked about this past Monday. Without any warning, law enforcement used flash grenades and tear gas to clear hundreds of peaceful protesters from Lafayette Square before the 7 p.m. DC curfew. And then Lafayette Square is a park that lies directly north of the White House. The protesters had gathered there to demand an end to police brutality against white Americans. Within that area, within that one block area where St. John's Church is located, and by the way, St. John's Church is over 200 years old, has been nicknamed the Church of Presidents. Every president since James Madison has attended at least one service there, according to the church's website. And the church is part of the progressive denomination of the Episcopal Church. Excuse me. Now, amazingly, you might find it hard to believe, but within a few minutes after the area had been cleared, Trump walks through Lafayette Square over to St. John's Church and has photos taken of him standing in front of the church holding a Bible. By the way, the Bible happened to be upside down. I don't know if that's like a signal or Freudian slip or what. But, now, according to a broadcast by Anderson Cooper on CNN, he had kind of a timeline of events here. So at 6:10 p.m. Monday, CNN caught on camera Attorney General Bill Barr viewing the protesters and law enforcement. At 6:31 p.m., law enforcement moves closer to the protesters, putting on their gas masks. At 6:35 p.m., law enforcement engages protesters and are using tear gas and percussion grenades to move the protesters back. And that's according to reporters that were there, obviously. And this was an unprovoked attack by law enforcement, according to those reporters. A few minutes later, Trump began speaking at the Rose Garden. That's about 7 minutes later. And then shortly after that, for about 7 minutes. And then shortly after that, Trump heads out of the White House, crosses the exact spot where law enforcement had just cleared the protesters, and then stands in front of the St. John's Church. Trump was handed a Bible by his daughter, Ivanka, and photos were taken of him standing outside the church. And then all this occurred in less than 1 hour. Now, before law enforcement cleared the area of the peaceful protesters, clergy members were at the church passing out water and snacks to the protesters. Reverend Gina Gerbasi was a rector of a different St. John's Episcopal Church in the city, told Huffington Post that she and seminarian Julia Joyce Dominic were tear gassed and driven off the church property by police. Quote, "The irony, the sickening, the sacrilegious irony is that we are being driven off in order for a photo opportunity to show the president has his commitment to religious ideas." Reverend Gerbasi said, quote, "It's a grotesque and offensive and sacrilegious." Later, Julie Dominic posted on Facebook, quote, "No warning, screaming, flash grenades, and tear gas came at us. People ran as fast as they could around the corner of the church. Within minutes, all the church volunteers were met with a crowd running from the police and the police swarming the church property." Quote, we were gassed for a photo op, Dominic added. And any life values, is any life valuable to him? Is this all about ratings, unquote. At a later briefing, Attorney General Bill Barr said that there was no correlation between moving the protest perimeter out by 1 block and Trump's visit to the church. Attorney General Barr had said that the protesters provoked the response by law enforcement. But according to a CNN reporter who had been on the scene for exactly 3.5 hours before the actions of law enforcement, there had not been any projectiles thrown at the police. According to reporters on the scene, there are many forms of law enforcement agents on the streets surrounding the White House. You have U.S. Parks Police, Secret Service, ATF, DEA, FBI agents, and even the Bureau of Prisons have people there, and it appears that many of them are from Texas for some reason. One of the CNN reporter had said he saw one prison guard wearing a shirt from a prison near Houston, Texas. There are also DC National Guard and over 4,000 National Guard from different states in that area. Active duty troops from Fort Dunn, New York, and Fort Bragg, North Carolina have been called to DC, but they're not out on the streets. So it's just an amazing thing that he would, it's got to be obvious that there was no coincidence that he set that up, had people, the police, the law enforcement clear out that area so he could go down and stand by that church holding his upside down Bible.
Wow.
Yeah. I know.
I mean, how just how fabricated was that entire event? I mean, my gosh. Well, just incredible. Tracy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, it's just how you described it. It's unbelievable, but it happened.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's crazy. I read Gigi's Facebook post. She made it private and public, and it was shared over 81,000 times, and including by me, I've shared it as well. But it was a really graphic, recounted memory of it, and it sounded just horrible. And then he had the Bible upside down. That's just it was unbelievable. The whole thing was completely staged.
Well, it
And
probably made just as much sense to him upside down as right side up. So
ex-
Yeah.
exactly.
And I didn't hear, I guess I didn't read or hear, if he talked much there. I think he maybe, I don't know what he said while he was at the church, but it's just an obvious.
I think it was just a photo opportunity, really. I think it was just,
Stood there, get your pictures and then go
yeah.
back. But,
I'm sure you've already seen those photos, but he looks identical to some of the poses that Hitler had done in a similar manner. Just holding things up, waving it around.
Yeah, you had Hitler. You saw that little post I put with Hitler and Saddam Hussein and
Right.
a couple others holding their Bible or their Quran or whatever, and that same pose, exact same pose.
I saw those. I didn't know how doctored those were or if those were real. I wasn't completely sure.
Well, it was on the internet. It had to be real.
It had to be real, right?
Right. I mean, YouTube is gospel these days, right?
Yeah, I don't know either. But
Oh. No, I mean, some of those were historical photos because I had seen those well before this event. The one with Hitler, anyway. I guess I don't recall seeing the ones with Saddam Hussein, but certainly with Hitler, I had seen that photo before. So that one I know was not doctored, but can't say for sure about the other one.
Gotcha.
beginning.
Yeah, well, Tim, thanks so much for that story. And we'll be right back after another short break here.
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me, but these feels, they come and go, and they come so easily. Tell me what it is about you that I can't forget, but you're breaking down my walls again just to set me free. Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling? Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling?
And we're back with some more Sounds Reasonable. Faith has consequences. Those that know me know I have said this many times. This is especially true when faith attempts to, dare I say, trump science. Tracy has a story for us along these lines. So Tracy, it's all yours.
All right. I chose a story to present to you that was published by the Associated Press on 2 weeks ago, this past Friday on May the 22nd. And the reason it's a 2-week-old story is because it's regarding when Trump declared churches essential. I believe that since it's been 2 weeks, I think that the of coronavirus cases will start to reflect based on that decision, especially hospitalizations. But if there are any outbreaks that occurred in churches, it'll start showing right now. But the story is entitled Trump Declares Churches Essential as CDC Releases Reopening Guidelines. President Donald Trump's declaration that houses that provide essential services comes at a precarious point in the National Balancing Act that pits the call of worship against the risk of coronavirus. Even before Trump's comments, which came alongside the release of guidance for reopening faith organizations from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Christian leaders in several states made plans to welcome back congregants on the week of Pentecost, May 31st. The new CDC guidance would energize houses of worship that might want to reopen their doors, despite evidence of ongoing risk of the virus spreading through communal gatherings. While it suggests steps such as asking congregants to cover their faces and limiting the sharing of worship aids, the CDC document says it is not meant to regulate or prescribe interactions of faith communities. I don't think that at church they'll be able to keep their hands to themselves or wear masks because they sing and all of that stuff. I think maybe they'll have plans to do that, but I don't think it'll turn out that way. The guidance released is similar to draft guidance drawn up by the CDC more than a month ago, but shelved by administration officials. One difference, the earlier version discussed it opening in stages, such as video streaming and drive-in services, with later phases allowing in-person gatherings limited in size and social distancing. The guidance released on May the 22nd has no discussion of a phased-in opening. Tension over when and how to reopen houses of worship has varied depending on the state, as different areas set their own pace for easing pandemic stay-at-home orders. Trump called for the resumption of in-person religious services repeatedly that week and said that Friday he would override governors that did not do so, though it's unclear whether Trump has any authority to supersede state leaders on the issue. Trump has been known to strong-arm governors, and it actually turned out that he couldn't override the governors. He was really just trying to strong-arm them, in my opinion. The president suggested a day before that friction over the issue was more common in states run by Democrats because, quote, churches are not being treated with respect, end quote, by many of their governors. One of those Democrats, California Governor Gavin Newsom, was warned by Trump's Justice Department that the state's phase-in plan to restart economic activity puts an unfair burden on worship by not permitting churches to open earlier in the process. More than 1,200 California pastors were planning to restart worship on May 31st, despite some stay-at-home orders, which he has said would likely allow for religious gatherings within weeks. Now, it's important to note that this past week, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in California voted narrowly to keep the ban on houses of worship not being able to have in-house services.
Right.
So hope maybe that'll set a precedent there. Among the California process that was leading the call for resuming in-person gatherings was Danny Carroll of Water of Life Community Church in Fontana. State officials don't understand that people of faith need contact, that they need to worship together. Carroll said in an interview, quote, "We're trying to close the gap, thoughtfully, humbly, nicely." Carroll described the California church leaders' effort as disconnected from politics. Quote, "We don't deal with how people vote, we deal with how people live."
Oh, if only that were true.
Right? I really find it difficult to understand why they're placing a different role on the church than on the supermarket, cafe, or restaurant. Pastors in other states, however, had already begun outlining plans to welcome back worshipers in person before the month's end. Florida's Rodney Howard Brown, arrested in March for holding a large in-person service at his church, charges that were later dropped, is preparing to reopen with an outdoor service on Pentecost. Catholic and conservative Lutheran churches in Minnesota had notified that state's Democratic governor that they plan to resume this week in advance of the holiday in defiance of his order. Now that the state has deemed the risk of spreading coronavirus low enough to reopen non-essential businesses, we have respectfully believed that it is our right and duty to safely resume public ministry to the faithful, even without the support of the governor, said Lucas Woodford, president of the Minnesota South District of the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. The Becket Fund for Religious Liberty has backed the Catholics and Lutherans' case, saying continuing to keep Minnesota churches closed represents a First Amendment violation. Now, weren't we talking about the freedom of religion on Facebook, how that's not the same? Because they can worship at home.
Yeah, I don't recall anywhere. I don't recall anywhere in the Constitution that says that churches must be open.
Right. I mean, most church services are televised anyway or streamed online, and
and archived. I mean, our local Baptist church, or E3, our local E3 church has every one of their sermons on demand. So
sure,
you can pull it up and view it anytime, anywhere.
But
yeah, I mean, they do that for shut-ins for the elderly who are sick and can't go out, and I mean, that's why they do that.
But you can't pass the collection plate.
Exactly.
Yeah, that does seem to be a major drawback, doesn't it? Can't pass the collection plate.
But they're missing, though. They could, though, if they set up their little PayPal account or whatever and say, you know, every time you monitor or you view this sermon, go to PayPal.
Exactly.
Put in your $10 or whatever.
It was also pointed out that if they were going to declare churches essential businesses, and Donald Trump compared it to liquor stores and abortion clinics, if he's going to compare it to businesses, perhaps they should pay taxes.
Yes, been for that for a long time.
Exactly. Think about how much money that would draw in if they did pay taxes.
Yeah, there are some. Just since we're on that, just quickly, there are several small towns in the New England area that literally have gone bankrupt because so much property is owned by the churches. You know, realize that churches will own property not just where the church sits, but people, because they will property to the church, for example, they end up owning that. And so I just couldn't believe that when I heard that, because I used to live out there. I used to live in the Connecticut area. So anyway.
Right.
And if they were taxed too, wouldn't the Catholic Church be able to declare some of that money they have to spend on all those child abuse cases or abuse cases? They probably get a tax break for some.
Yeah, it'd be tax deductible now.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, let me skip down here because we're kind of running out of time. Donald Trump had, in his little speech, he said that he gave credit to the churches, saying that they love their congregations and that they would be trusted to keep everyone safe. So I guess he assumes that they will follow the CDC guidelines to the letter, mask 6 feet apart, 1/4 capacity, and all. What do you think about that? Do you think that they will wear masks, sit 6 feet apart, and sing with their masks on, and not hug, not shake hands? What do you think about that?
I've been to
Will it go like that?
I've been to the store, the Walmart, and those places, and you see people, they just can't abide by, they can't wear a mask, they can't wear it properly half the time. And
well, some might, but I mean, this gets into the issue of again, faith. When you literally have people saying, "I do not need a mask because God is going to protect me," and then I should have tried to take account of this, but I can name at least 4 now that made that statement are now dead.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So as we
That's
started
really,
out
and I
this
think
session-
since the economy's,
Go ahead, Tracy.
I think since the economy is opening back up and more things are opening and churches can reopen and all this stuff can reopen, the public is getting more relaxed and they think that things are getting better and that things are okay, and they're getting a false sense of security, and they're going out and they're just thinking everything's okay. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like we're all guinea pigs at this point, but I'm not falling for it.
I'm not either.
Agreed.
And the thing about church, when they sing, I think that the particulates will go out further than 6 foot. I don't even think 6 foot's enough when you're singing.
I have no idea what the safe distance would be, but it's not going to be just 6 feet.
Right. Anyway, I think we're going to start hearing about some outbreaks in churches. There is the one Arkansas church, and the story does touch on that. The one where the pastor and his wife had COVID-19, and then they went to church, and then 38 people had it. Some people died.
Sure.
And that happened right before Donald Trump tried to strong arm all the governors into opening the churches.
I mean, at the moment,
the
death rate is approximately 6%. Now that hopefully that will actually go down once we get accurate enough testing to determine the denominator of that fraction. Okay, but right now that's 6 out of 100. So if you have a congregation of 150 or so, you're going to watch 9 to 10 of them die as a result of it.
And I think, to me, that's it's criminal. That's manslaughter. You especially if you knowingly circumvent requirements and kill people by doing it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree, Tim. I agree. Tracy,
So
thanks so
I'm
much.
public and, mhm. Okay.
Thanks so much. We're going to have to move on or we'll be way over time. So thanks again. And we'll be back right after this short break with our crazy story of the week.
I'm feeling so hollow. Don't you know? And don't you know? I'm living in shadow. Don't you know? And don't you know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? And you were fool's gold. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And I did it all for love. Yes, I did it all for love. Oh.
And we're back to our crazy story of the week. So it's no wonder the religious right loves Trump. After all, this has been their chance to really rake in the cash as well as consolidate power of their base. Tim, you've got our crazy story, so go ahead. Tell us what it's all about.
Got to unmute myself there. This crazy story comes to us from the Daily Beast on 6/1, titled, "The Pastor Who Called Trump's White House Holy Ground is Raking in the Bucks." The article is referring to televangelist Pastor Paula White. The article is quoted in saying, Pastor Paula White is a case study in how to leverage religious connections for political gain. Pastor White is President Trump's special advisor to the Office of Faith and Opportunity and is in charge of the One Voice prayer movement, which she launched out of the White House a year ago. And man, has she been busy. She's mobilizing religious right leaders to promote Trump's Reopen America message and defend his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. She sends out regular, quote, prayer alerts, which are more like press releases, boasting about the president's leadership and, of course, urging people to keep praying for Trump. With polls showing that Trump's support is slipping among the evangelicals, she has become a key player in smoothing over the skepticism about Trump's leadership, acting as a bridge between him and the Christian right community. Okay, so now let's talk about crazy stuff, if that's not enough. According to the article, White's supporters see her as an agent sent by God to ensure Trump's reelection. She claims to have had a divine encounter at the White House that gave her, quote, every authority to declare the White House as holy ground because I was standing there and where I stand is holy. Holy, right? I mean, holy cow. She has appeared at Trump rallies to demonize his political opponents and warn Christians that they will, quote, stand accountable before God if they vote against Trump. She was front and center at the Rose Garden on National Day of Prayer, on the National Day of Prayer on May 7th, where she had a 2-hour webcast before the White House event, thanking God for Trump and asked that, quote, wicked leaders be removed from government positions.
Wicked leaders that have that big D behind their name.
Yes, they do. She also commanded the coronavirus to, quote, to be gone, to be gone, to be done. We say it is enough. Die now, coronavirus 19. We command right now that this virus stop. There will be no more spread in the name of Jesus.
Let's see, what date is that article?
That was the June, what do they say, 1st? Yeah, June 1st article.
Well, I'm starting to believe she doesn't have much power. It's still spreading.
Still spreading, yeah.
Wait a minute. When does it go into effect, though?
Well,
True, man. It's true. I guess we don't know that.
Well,
how long a prayer actually takes.
She
to
made
reach
that
her
statements
goal.
on May 7th, so maybe it takes a little time, 14 days or something to go in effect. But so really, I don't know if it can get any crazier than that. But and Pastor White is making appearances, and I guess it seems like she's showing up everywhere and is raking the dough of doing this. So according to Cynthia Burrock, a political scientist at Ohio State University, quote, Paula White has a niche that she has cultivated as a Christian prophetic voice, teaching her followers to sow a seed for God and financializing Christianity. She is someone who is recognizable as a particular segment of the Christian right voting bloc, Protestant Pentecostals.
That statement where she says sow a seed for God. I mean, that's code. In other words, go out and have a bunch of kids for God is in essence. I'm serious. That's
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the Quiverful movement. You ever heard of that?
I have not.
Now look that up sometime. Quiverful. There's that one family, for example, that was so proud they've got 19 children. I mean, just I know. I see your look, Tracy. I know. But that's literally the mindset that she's trying to promote.
Yeah. And then over Memorial Day weekend, she was part of a panel of pastors on Fox News discussing Trump's order to reopen churches, even if it meant overriding stay-at-home orders that Tracy talked about, and calling churches essential. She said, "We don't want to be discriminated against." And according to Peter Montgomery, who tracks the religious right at the People for the American Way, quote, she's still out there raising money for her spiritual ministry and telling people they will get spiritual blessings if they send her money. That's all I had for my crazy.
Yeah, so starting with that stimulus check.
Yes, right. Send it.
I don't know why they even bothered sending them out. They could have just given them directly to her. Would have saved some postage.
There we go. All right.
Oh wow, yeah, it's just incredible the stuff that people will swallow, again, that's obviously what our mission is exposing stuff like this and hopefully raising consciousness concerning tactics that are used by the religious right. So yeah, thanks so much for that story, Tim. Tracy, any final thoughts on that?
Is that a division between church and state issue too? Like,
Yeah, it should be.
you know,
You know, that's become so blurred. We'll definitely get to that in a future show. You know, Jeffersonian and Jeffersonian principles. Because Jefferson's probably my favorite president. In fact, Tim's got him in the background there. So
yeah, that's one of my pet peeves.
yeah, absolutely. So I mean, we will get to that particular topic. But again, Tim, thanks so much. Sure appreciate that story. So this will wrap us up for this week. If you have enjoyed our program, please pass the word to your friends and associates, believers and non-believers alike. Again, just a reminder that you are welcome to post questions and comments on our Facebook page, Sounds Reasonable. We look forward to next week when we will present our next episode. Remember, there is a big difference between having good reasons for what one accepts to be true and having bad ones. Incidentally, this is the only distinction one needs to become a strict atheist. This has been Dr. Brad for Tracy and Tim saying so long.